In 1977, a adaptation of The Hobbit was made for NBC in the United States. Now, this has a very unusual history. Just to start you off with some trivia, it was created by Topcraft, a precursor to Studio Ghibli for the animation. And what I say is, I never knew this until literally started researching this video. I've seen this adaptation hundreds of times, and I had it on VHS as a child. And I have it on DVD now. The adaptation and animation, all of this, it had a very Studio Ghibli vibe to it. It has that fluidness and that kind of slightly Japanese quirk. And, yeah, there it is. So the precursor to Studio Ghibli, and it explains quite a lot of things. Now, I'm not going to sit here and explain the plot of The Hobbit to you. For the simple reason, we will be here for weeks. And we all know it. If you follow my channel, even through osmosis, you know the plot of The Hobbit. It's a lovely, charming little children's book, and definitely one that's a great read. Now, the adaptation of this was interesting because you get a lot of interesting stories and a lot of interesting stuff that kind of contradicts each other. This film was made, they were able to make this film because The Hobbit was still in the public domain at the time, despite claims to the contrary from the copyright holders now. And the voice cast is actually really good. The animation, like I said, by precursor to Studio Ghibli, Topcraft, create this lovely, fluid, pretty look. And a lot of the art style takes a lot of cues from art of the era that the book was written in, which is nice. Now, there is songs in this film. There is music. The songs are lovely and charming. And a lot of the songs primarily draw from the songs featured prominently in the book. They compose them, rearrange them, and they compose some original stuff for it too, and it's definitely sweet. As an adaptation goes, this adaptation is interesting because it is very close to the book, but it's a very toned down, soft adaptation. It definitely is aimed at children. The tone of it, the look of it, the more violent, the darker stuff from the book is definitely turned down a little bit. And you can feel it. The story is very tight, and it's I always say an efficient adaptation in the sense that it tells the full story, but it does trim some moments, trims down some of the context. And some of the context is a little bit missing for certain scenes and characters just because of the nature of turning it into a children's film. Everything is very much put in the forefront. The moralistic tale is very much at the front of this in terms of adaptation. A lot of the early criticism focused on adaptation issues, including the style of artwork used by the Japanese-American co-production team. Some Tolkien fans questioned the appropriateness of repackaging the material as a family film for young audiences. And Douglas A. Anderson, a Tolkien scholar of the time, called this adaptation excellent in his own introduction to the annotated Hobbit, although he did not elaborate. Few critics said it was confusing for those not familiar with the plot, and I do agree that, like I said, it tells an efficient story, but because it's trimmed in certain ways, sometimes things just happen out of nowhere, and the pacing of this is all over the place. It is a charming little film. And I mean that, it's genuinely charming. Now, I will say this is not a prequel to the Lord of the Rings film that came out in any way. They're unlinked. One is a British production, this is American. This has its own sequel. So it's there, just going to put this one out there. They're very different, they're not linked. Although, and I will say this, you can buy them as box set. And I will be talking about its sequel, The Return of the King, in a later. Now, it aired on television in 1977, and it was produced with the goal of creating tie-in storybooks and songs recording for children. The soundtrack was released on an LP with dialogue from the film by Disney of all things. So there is a Disney link to this movie as well. And it was later released on ABC Home Video Enterprises in the early 80s on Betamax and VHS by Sony, and Warner Brothers on VHS in 1991 and again in 96. The DVD was released, and it was put into a box set with its sequel and the alternative Lord of the Rings film. And there was a deluxe edition as well. There are some missing sound effects in these, but they seem to be a common problem throughout. I think a lot of the sound might have been lost. It's a charming little movie, and I mean that. It's genuinely charming and very sweet. I actually really like this. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, and it's definitely not perfect by any means. And I say that wholeheartedly. And I've watched a lot of adaptations of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for these videos, and this one actually came out as one of my favourites. Although I don't have as much nostalgia and love for it as I would say the Lord of the Rings film, the British Lord of the Rings film from the same era. Like I said, adaptation is an interesting one, and like I said, it trims. It does leave some confusion and pacing issues, and some of the story structure is a little bit off. But I want to give it to the voice cast, because out of everything, the music and the voice cast are the best thing in this. They all deliver their lines really well. There's a lot of American television icons pop up in this. And the music is charming and sweet. And I would love to play it for you, but copyright. Hello. Ultimately, if you want a nice adaptation of The Hobbit that you can sit down and watch with the kids, this is it. I showed this to my godson when he was 6, and he fell in love with it. So that really says everything. And I think this film, you have to look at it through the eyes of a child, not as an adult. Is it flawed? Yes. Is it a charming, sweet adaptation? Yes. And I think some people are a little bit unfair on it, but knowing the Studio Ghibli link actually explains so much with that animation style, and kind of these really gorgeous watercoloured painted backgrounds, because it's cell animation. So the backgrounds are pretty. They're really pretty. They're hand-drawn. Everything is hand animated. Nothing was done on computers. There are some animation flaws, but there's nothing wrong with that. I will, at some point, be talking about the Russian 1985 Hobbit movie as well. But that's a whole different kettle of fish. And that's a big undertaking. I'm still struggling with getting one with decent subtitles. But yeah, the characters are done really well, and I really do like this. I think as a nice taste intro to The Hobbit and Tolkien's world for kids, this is the perfect movie. My nostalgia is definitely there, and I admit nostalgia biased is a thing. But when you look at this film through the eyes of a child, with its charming animation, lovely songs, and dramatic voice acting, and all of this stuff that really, like watching my godson watch this when he was little, was an amazing experience. And ultimately, seeing him transfixed by this was fun. I mean, he was quiet for the entire thing, which is a feat in itself. But this is a really lovely little adaptation, and definitely one that holds up really well even today.